Hi, I'm Leonore. Welcome back to Soul Searching Tarot. I am doing part 2 of the Gemini, which should have really been part 1. But I did your reading, Gemini, in case you're wondering. I uploaded it just hours ago. But I decided to do things in reverse for you guys, and was not intentional. It just happened that way. I'm impulsive. What do you want me to do? But I had the energy to do your reading. I just didn't have the energy to do your zodiac sign. The insight and information that I give for all zodiac sign. I'll tell you the truth, Gemini. I do kind of feel sentimental. You know, all my air signs were left for last. You are my second last. Libra will be my last. It doesn't mean that I'm getting off the platform. I will still be here doing readings and giving you insight in astrology, because my channel does integrate astrology and tarot card reading. But besides the fact that the new moon is out and it gives me hardly no energy, so I apologize if I'm like slurring or just like what is she trying to say? Spit it out. Because Gemini, your planet is a planet of communication. So I am not 100%, so please forgive me. I am not 100%. But I want to do your part 1, which is actually part 2. Insight, information on your zodiac sign. So I feel sentimental because I'm at the end of my zodiac signs. I didn't do them in order, so I don't want you to think that the way I did all my zodiac signs on my platform on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, are in order. They are not in order. I do explain that on my birth charts, so you're more than welcome to look at my birth chart videos if you need to know anything about astrology and zodiac sign in its deepest depth of knowledge. Otherwise, I do have different videos for different zodiac signs. In this case, it's you, my Gemmies. Hi. All right, so again, welcome to Soul Searching Tarot. Your house is the 3rd house, Gemini. So when you hear 3rd house, that is you. You come before Cancer and after Taurus. Aries is the first sign. You are still considered the toddlers of the zodiac sign. So I'll tell you what represents you. Community, family, environment, your siblings is a big factor in Gemini, in the representation of Gemini. Because if you really think about it, you know, we're at that age, usually between 5 and 10 years old, where we work very close to our family. We're getting to know who our family members are and what makes us feel comfortable. And so our environment is a big factor. And when I say our, it's because, you know, we all have a little bit of every sign inside of us. We do. Even if you look at your birth chart and your house is empty, you're like, well, I don't have any Gemini. I don't have any Gemini either. But if you really look in depth into birth charts, and if you go back to my birth chart videos, you'll see how we really do in the end have a little bit of every zodiac sign in our birth chart, in our personality. So your opposite polarity, or your polar opposite, is Sagittarius. That's me. So I might not feel like a Gemini right now because I know I'm talking so slow, and it's because I'm just, the new moon really drains me and I'm tired, and I did 3 videos before you. And so I wanted to finish this, but your opposite polarity is Sagittarius. I do have a few Sagittarius placements in my chart, which means I also have Gemini, because Gemini is my opposite polarity. So when I ramble and talk like I'm doing now, that's Gemini. You are ruled by Mercury. Mercury is a planet of communication in every form, shape, any way of, and I'll go into it because Gemini not only is your opposite polarity Sagittarius, but Virgo does share a planet with you. Does that mean that you have some Virgo in you? Maybe. Absolutely. Yeah, you guys share a planet. So Virgo and Gemini are ruled by Mercury, Mercurial planet. So when people say, oh my God, Mercury is in retrograde, you know, technology and contracts are all out the window, don't sign anything, and, you know, your gadget starts to, you know, act up and stuff like that. Yeah, that's for the most part very true. Absolutely. It is the planet of communication in every way, including radio frequency, including the way the animals communicate with each other. You know, their vibrational tone in how they communicate, even little creatures, even little insects. You know, they have a way of communicating. That all represents Gemini. That all represents the planet of Mercury. All right, sound waves, technology, big time. And so, you know, as well as speech impediment and slurred speech, learning disability. I mean, so when I'm telling you that your planet represents all types of communication, I mean all types of communication, okay, including some type of learning. All right, or how you learn. All right. So it definitely represents community, environment, family, siblings, you know. I will talk about 2 or 3 celebrities, probably towards the end of the video. Actually, definitely by the end of the video, not probably, definitely by the end of the video, who were ruled by your planet, Mercury. They all had a sun in Gemini. And so I would like to talk about that. Your planet, Gemini, does have some type of duality. You live within a reality, Some people might call you bipolar. And listen, you don't have to be just Sun in Gemini to be like, oh my God, I think this person's bipolar. I mean, I know what bipolar is. I lived with a person who was bipolar. Does that mean that Geminis are bipolars? No. It's just that they have this duality nature of them. You guys are air sign. You're mutable signs. You know, you're part of the mutable signs, you know, and that includes Aquarius, and so does Libra, you know, so Gemini being the baby, the toddlers, Libra being the adults, and Aquarius being the elderly. That is your air elements. You are air elements. Air meaning all about logic. And Geminis, you're known to like really talk a lot. And if you don't talk a lot, you know, which I doubt, I haven't met any Gemini that I could sit down and have a great conversation with for hours. You know, you do suffer from some type of anxiety or some type of mental illness. You definitely do self-doubt yourself constantly. I mean, like constantly. But, you know, I want you to know, and I talk about this in my birth chart, that you are the babies of the zodiac. You're just learning to get to know yourself. It's a whole new world out there. You know, so if you look at the order of the zodiac signs, Gemini comes third. Okay? You're still considered in that early stage of the zodiac sign. Okay? I'll try to remember to leave a link on my birth charts just to explain a little bit about that. But, you know, I know Geminis that have difficulties in as far as their mental state. They do have difficulty just staying on track, focusing, depending on their birth chart. Depending on their moon, Mercury, Mars, that all is a factor. But Geminis do have a hard time just knowing their self-worth, if I have to put it plain and simple. Smartest people in the world. You guys are really one of the smartest people that I talk to. And the fact that you guys are my polar opposite. You know, I love talking to Geminis, but you do self-doubt yourself a lot, and which brings you to a point of anxiety. And then on top of the anxiety, it brings you to a level of mental illness, some type of level of mental illness that your psychiatrist or doctor may diagnose you with. Not knowing that birth charts are very important. The reason you are the way you are, it's because of your birth chart. I'm not going to go too much into that, Geminis. I'm sorry. Don't have really the time. But definitely do look at my birth chart videos. You'll kind of know what I'm talking about and how that affects you. It affects me. My birth chart affects me, and how I am, who I am, the journey that I'm taking in life or did not take in life. Okay? It also rules weather patterns. Gemini rules weather patterns. So again, you guys are the air element of the zodiac. You are your sign, your house represents the weather pattern, the seasons, believe it or not. So if it's like snowing in Florida, and when I mean snowing, I mean I'm from New York. So when I mean snowing in Florida, I mean like they get an inch and they're like panicking and everything is closed down because there's an inch of snow out there. When I come from New York, forget about Boston. If you're from Boston or Albany, I mean, 10 inches is nothing to you, right? But I'm from New York, where we're used to snow. We're used to weather change, right? And so you guys rule that. You know, you guys rule weather patterns, and the fact that, you know, there's a quote in the Bible that I heard from a wonderful mentor that kind of just puts it plain and simple. And he says, you know, there will be a time where man will not know time from season. Meaning, if it's snowing in fucking Florida, it's not supposed to snow in Florida. Yes, there's hurricanes, but that's about it, you know, right? You pretty much have hot weather down there, but in warm weather, but yeah, that's it. That's actually a quote in the Bible, you know, where man will not know whether what season it is, you know. So that's the fluctuation of when and what. That's all is under the house of Gemini. Now your shadow side. I did speak about your shadow side a little bit but you have a very conflicting contradiction about pretty much everything. Relationships, money, career, love. Like, it's like, it's such an oxymoron, right? Like, conflicting contradictions. Well, you're fickle about things, you're like always overthinking. Oh, God. I'm sorry. I'm from a whole different type of zodiac sign in my birth chart. So when I see somebody like, a Gemini, and I know a few Geminis, whether it's sun, moon, or Mercury, and I'm like, oh, just get over it. Move on. Who cares? But that is your opposite sign. That is your Sagittarius. The opposite sign of your zodiac sign, Gemini, is Sagittarius. They do the complete opposite. They're like this. What? It didn't work out? Okay, well, maybe it'll work out tomorrow. Where you are like, no, wait a minute. This is killing me right now. And you literally stay in that thought and in that mindset for hours, if not days, if not weeks, if not months, if not years. And it's disturbing. It literally can bring you into mental illness. All right, that all represents Gemini. Also, you need to become very self-aware of that, okay? So that you can control your own psychological issues. Otherwise, your ego will take over you. And because you are the babies of the zodiacs, of the zodiac wheel, the zodiac sign, Gemini is the third house, there's 12 houses. You guys are only the third house. So you're just growing up and learning, and you're not even in high school yet. So, if I had to compare it to that way, but you're just learning about life, and it is a whole new world for you. It's like, but your home is your comfort. People with Gemini placements don't really go too far from home. They stay at home. Which is fine. They stay very close to home. They don't really, that's their comfort zone, I dated a couple of Geminis, and they still live with, their parents. Not that they don't want something better for themselves. They do, but they still feel very comfortable in the family environment. And some Geminis do not have that family environment. Some Geminis have a very rough environment. So there is a shadow side of that as well. Just because you're Gemini, don't think that your life is going to be all peaches and cream, I will talk about, and I will get into people who were born into a very rough environment, who had to go to foster home after foster home, or who lived in a very rough neighborhood to survive. No matter what, it just Gemini represents environment, community, neighborhood, family, whether it's the shadow side or the good side. All right. All right, so I think that's pretty much as far as Gemini, I wanted to talk about. I have notes, and I don't want to miss anything, so I just keep looking down. But in tarot, I don't know if you know this, I read tarot. I already did your tarot card reading, Gemini. You were represented by two cards. The Lovers, that is the card, your card, the Lovers, and the Magician. So if you listen to tarot card reading, you would know that the Magician, come on, the fucking Magician, Gemini. If your card represents the Lovers and the Magician, the card of manifestation in a good or a bad way, you have to stop self-doubting yourself. You are the manifestors of the universe, along with Virgo. Okay? All right, so never mind that. We're not talking about tarot. right, so if I had to explain or describe the third house in the following placements, so I tell people all the time in my videos to go to astro.cafeastrology.com / natal chart or birth chart. You have to know your placements. It is very important. It is your blueprint of your life, of who you are, of where you're going. Okay, I say that constantly, and so I will leave the link. You may click on it if you're able to click on it. If you're not able to click on it, just write it down and go to this website. It is very user friendly. You definitely have to know the date of birth, your date of birth, I should say, where you were born, because that is a huge factor when it comes to time zones. We're not, this world doesn't, it's not on one time zone. There's different time zones, and the time you were born does really help, only because it gives you your ascending sign, and your ascending sign is about your perception of the world. It also represents your introvert or extroverted personality. So in the end, you have two sun signs, but one is called a rising or ascending sign, and the other one is really called a sun sign, which most people know what their sun sign is. All right. So definitely find out what placements you have, because right now I'm going to be talking about the placements, the third house, which is Gemini, in each planet, and how that affects you or affects someone you know. So, for example, let's start with Mercury, since it's the very first sign that I wanted to talk about. Mercury comes after the moon. If you look at your birth chart placement, it is the planet of communication. It is your planet. It represents technology as well. Remember, it's all types and forms of communication. Now, if you have a Gemini placed in Mercury, or a Mercury placed in the house of Gemini, you need to be stimulated by constantly learning. You have to be stimulated by that. You're a very curious soul, and you like to play devil's advocate. For someone who has a placement in the house of Gemini under the planet of Mercury, which is its home sign, basically, you like to provoke arguments, which is funny to me, but you're asking someone like me, because you like to provoke and debate and argue, just to stir up some type of controversy. Now, do you do that on purpose? Maybe. Do you do it by accident? Well, you know what? Again, the fact that you have Gemini and Mercury, you need to know more. You're curious. You need to be stimulated, you need to be stimulated and learn and see what other people think or behave. So that's Mercury and Gemini, if you have that in your birth chart. Okay. So if you have Mars in Gemini, if you look at your birth chart and you have Mars in Gemini, well, let's see what that's about. It says, well, you need to determine or to figure things out as much as possible. You also may be diagnosed with ADHD. ADHD is another mental disorder. Remember, your sign does represent that in some shape, form, or way. ADHD stands for attention deficit hyper disorder. So you may have that in Mars in Gemini. So if you have Mars in Gemini, you may suffer from ADHD. Okay, so you're very impulsive. That's all about being ADHD. But they are very smart people. Does that mean that they're not smart? Absolutely not. I know a lot of smart people who have ADHD. All right, you are all about exploring. Venus. Venus in Gemini. Well, I know somebody who has a Venus in Gemini. They have a wandering eye. They can charm the pants off of you, or the skirt off of you. They do always have like crushes, you know, so they grow up having a lot of crushes. Now, you know, birth charts do change after a while as an individual, because, you know, we do end up learning from our lessons, and we want to succeed, and once we get older and wiser, you know, things do change, and so we try not to make the same mistakes we did when we were younger. So even though you may be a charmer and have a wandering eye, you know, you do grow out of that eventually, okay? You do. You find, hopefully, the love of your life, or even if you found the love of your life and kind of fucked that up, you know, hopefully you'll have another one, and you learn from it, you know. God knows I've learned from my mistakes. It happens to everyone. Saturn in Gemini. So, folks, just in case you don't know, Saturn right now is in its home planet of Capricorn. Saturn rules Capricorn. So, what does it mean when you have Saturn in Gemini? You definitely come from a very rigid environment, and rigid meaning rough, poor. You know, I'm going to talk about a couple of celebrities that came from a very rough environment that ended up making it has celebrities. And that all represents Saturn and Gemini. Does that mean that they had Saturn and Gemini? I don't know yet. I don't remember. I think one of them did, but that's not the point. It just represents Gemini. If you have Saturn and Gemini, yeah, it's potent. It's even more potent if you had your sun in Gemini. Okay, so you do suffer from some type of speech impediment, slurred speech. You also have some type of restriction in your early life. So you may, even though you may have grown up in a very rough environment, a rigid environment, you have some, you're learning, even though you may or may not have learning disability or speech impediment, the way you grew up in your early ages of going to school is all about also being rigid, a rigid environment. So if your environment or your community or neighborhood wasn't rigid, then your school life was very rigid and rough and strict. In this placement, you end up learning that you need to think before you speak. That is so Gemini. That represents Gemini to its fullest. Think before you speak. Neptune is also in its home sign, and I would have to say that you know, again, you have more of a religious background. That plays a big role in how you grew up. So your parents could have been very religious or spiritual, and that could have been a huge factor in your childhood. Also, you probably excel in some type of arts, whether it's science, visionary. Neptune is all about visionary. So you may be great you may excel great at the visual arts, more so than verbal, if I had to explain that part. Pluto, last and not least. I'm going to stop at Pluto, and then I'm going to go to the two celebrities that I really want to talk about that had Gemini placements. Pluto. If you have Pluto in Gemini, and again, this is all going back to your birth chart. So if you have these placements in your birth charts, and you're like, oh, what does that mean? I'm just giving you a little, like, I'm literally scratching the surface, because it does mean a lot much more than that. But I'm just literally giving you like a sentence or two of what that means. But if you have Pluto in Gemini, so Pluto in Gemini, again, Gemini rules community, neighborhood, environment, family. You probably moved a lot if you have a Pluto in Gemini. You didn't stay still. Your parents always were moving a lot. Also, you could be a compulsive liar. You learn how to read in between the lines. That is so Pluto in Gemini. Not surprised. You also have a lot of dark thoughts, and you also experience a lot of dark situations in your life. We're talking about the planet of the underworld, so yeah, that could happen. You also excel in psychiatry. So if you end up going to school for being in some type of psychiatric work, you will excel in it, because again, you know how to read in between the lines. You know how to treat mental illness. You'll probably be at the top of your game in that career with Pluto and Gemini. That comes very, emotional disturbance comes very instinctive to you. All right, so I'm gonna move on to the two celebrities that have Gemini placements. Hopefully you know who they are. They're dead, by the way. They've passed on, but they're super popular. One of them is Marilyn Monroe. Who does not know Marilyn Monroe? Even if you were born like yesterday, you'll be like, oh, yeah, I've heard about that name. It's Marilyn Monroe, the Marilyn Monroe. She had two placements in Gemini. She had her Mercury, if I'm not mistaken, yes, her Mercury and her Sun. She was born as a Gemini. So her outer personality was all Gemini. The fact that her Mercury was in Gemini, in its home sign of Gemini, she had these placements. So she knew how to use her voice, the sensuality, the way that she moved. Remember, communication, a plan of communication. You can communicate through body language, and she did that very well. Her voice, her sensual voice, she was an actress, a singer, a model in the 1940s and 50s. She did die of an overdose in the early 1960s. And so there's been a lot of controversy about the way she died. But yes, she had these two placements in Gemini. Now, she married Joe DiMaggio. Joe DiMaggio loved her unconditionally. and they had a wonderful marriage and connection. However, it only lasted 9 months. And that's pretty good for Marilyn Monroe. 9 months is like, oh shit, I'm like been married for like 19 years. But you know what? Marilyn Monroe was a type of person that did not want to be controlled, that liked her freedom. This is Gemini, the polar opposite of Sagittarius. Freedom is freedom, change, higher learning. This is a big thing for them. And so, to be controlled and put in place and be a housewife is not something that Gemini are comfortable doing. They're not. They need to explore. They need to go out there. Mercury is one of the fastest planet that orbits around the sun. And so they're about change, constantly change. They need to be stimulated. They cannot be in one position, in one place for a long time. They can't. It's impossible. So even though Joe DiMaggio and her divorced, and she was very upset about it, because I think it was one of her it was the love of her life, and just for Joe DiMaggio too. I think Joe DiMaggio, never spoke about their relationship. He had so much unconditional love for this woman, until his death. This man did not ever speak about his relationship with his ex-wife. When she died, he took care of all the funeral arrangements. Mind you, he wasn't even married to her. He brought flowers to her grave every week for at least 20 years. That's how much love he had for her. And yes, it didn't work out. But you get to know people. When people get married at an early age, you just don't know. There's things you have to learn in life. You may learn about life with each other, or you may learn about life separately. And I think that's one of the sad stories about their love life together. Now, one thing about Marilyn Monroe that I should say is that she put Playboy magazine on the map. Now, this is her Mercury in Gemini. She put Playboy on the map. Hugh Hefner, who was the owner of Playboy magazine, who founded Playboy magazine, had so much high regards for her. Now, this woman remember, she was a model. Before she was an actress, she was a model. So she modeled nude for Playboy magazine before she became a really big Hollywood star. And so Playboy magazine took out, they were this Marilyn Monroe. At that time, she wasn't called Marilyn Monroe. She was called Norma Jean. And when she became one of the hottest film stars in 1953, Playboy decided to publish her nude photos. Listen, at that time, at that day and age, having nude photos and being the hottest Hollywood star will probably ruin your career. For her, it did not. It escalated her career even more. And she didn't even care about it. She was like, yeah, I took nude photos for them, and I only got paid $50 for it. Whatever. It's only a body. Whatever. She just didn't care. And the fact that she didn't care and she didn't hide the fact, just made it more interesting for the public. And she really helped Playboy to become what Playboy is today. Because we're talking about the hottest Hollywood star at the moment in Playboy magazine. Nude. Now, the other person that I want to talk about was Christopher Wallace. His name is Notorious B.I.G. He's a Brooklyn rapper that pretty much changed the game in the 1990s. A Brooklyn rapper that changed the game. And listen, I grew up listening to rap in the mid-90s, and he did change the game. But, me being a Mars and Scorpio and Mars and Mercury, I was like, yeah. So into the Notorious B.I.G. or Biggie. His real name was Christopher Wallace, but he also was a Gemini, a Sun in Gemini, as well as a Saturn in Gemini. Because his Saturn was in Gemini, and I remember Saturn in Gemini is all about speech impediment, slur speech, stuttering. A lot of people don't know this, but the Notorious B.I.G. had problems with his speech. He had some mild form of speech impediment as well as slurred speech. He was bullied a lot in his younger years because of it, as well as because he had a lazy eye, which had nothing to do with Gemini. But you know, his mother was like, "You need to stand up for yourself, little boy." And his mother was a really great influence in his life, and he loved his children. You know, again, Gemini all represents family. And so Christopher Wallace, you know, did come from a rough neighborhood. He was in Brooklyn at the time. Not saying that all of Brooklyn is bad, especially now in this day and age. But at that time when he was growing up, it wasn't the greatest neighborhood. His mother was a single parent and raised this little boy, and she loved this little boy and loved this little boy. I had the privilege to see her one time when they were commemorating his death. P. Diddy was there. And so I had the privilege to be there, and when Christopher Wallace died, it did affect me, just like others, you know, stars and celebrities affected me when they died. You know, I was like, what? So and so died. You know, these big celebrities do influence our lives in some way or another, and so Biggie, you know, his albums were the greatest albums I've ever heard. He was the one. And listen, this is my opinion. He was one of the greatest lyricists out there. Again, Mercury in Gemini. He didn't have a Mercury in Gemini, but he was a Gemini, a sun in Gemini. Remember, this is the planet of communication. He told his stories. Like, you know, this is my life story, and I'm going to rap about it. And he rapped about it really well. The way he did it was such a one. It was like literally hearing a story being told in a rap, gangster rap type of way, New York style. Do you want to hear New York style, LA style, or Las Vegas style? Yeah, Biggie was like all about like, let me tell you about my life in a New York way, New York type of style. And so that was Biggie. One of his good friends that was pretty much complicated was Tupac. Tupac was also a Gemini. Now, Tupac, I didn't really like. I liked his song, but I wasn't really into it as much as Biggie. But I loved watching Tupac on screen. I loved the fact, the way he acted on screen. He was like, to me, it was like one of the most greatest underrated actor. I mean, he died at a very young age, but I mean, if he had lived and did more movies, I mean, this man would have made it in Hollywood big time. He did go to school for the visual arts, and Tupac had a lot of Gemini in his chart. I think he had Mercury, he had Venus in his chart. His sun was in Gemini. Like all these placements were all in his chart. He had more Gemini in his chart than Christopher Wallace, and but his moon was in Aries. That explains a lot, doesn't it? If you know anything about astrology, it'll be like this. Ooh, well, that explains a lot. Yeah, he had very impulsive, immature behavior when it came to his emotions, and that was pretty sad because the fact that him and Tupac grew up, but they were born in the same city. You know, Tupac eventually ended up being raised in Baltimore, if I'm not mistaken, and eventually got signed to a record company in the West Side, and then Biggie was signed to a record company in the East Side. You know, it made things complicated, unfortunately, and I remember hearing and when I was researching these celebrities, I remember hearing in my, you know, intuition, psychic type of, like, whatever you call it, brain, if that's what you want to call it, the word anomaly. I don't use the word anomaly. It's not in my vocabulary. But I mean, it happens to me constantly where I hear words that I don't use on a daily basis, if not at all. Did I hear it? Yes. But I kept hearing the word anomaly, and anomaly means unusual, unexpected. Now, these celebrities all died in an unusual, unexpected way. Their murders have not been solved, or their suicide have not been solved, or it's a myth or a theory. A lot of shit is a little twist and turn. Like, this is not concrete. This is like little twist and turn here. And so the fact that I could pick up energy, and while I was researching Geminis, let me tell you something. When I was researching these celebrities that are under your sun sign, I just kept hearing that word anomaly. I'm not gonna go any further after that, but that was pretty interesting. And of course, a Gemini research. The fact that I'm researching Gemini, I would hear that word, wouldn't I? It would come from a Gemini. All right, so I'm done with your video. Again, part 1 is your reading, so listen to part 1 if you are interested in tarot reading. Otherwise, thank you, Geminis, for being so very patient, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.